The legacy media is once again in a fit of collective outrage. They are in full-on panic mode over the smashing box office hit movie Sound of Freedom. Sound of Freedom tells the real-life story of Tim Ballard, a former US Homeland Security Agent who quits his job to rescue children around the world from child trafficking rings. Despite its low production and marketing budget, on July 4th, one of the biggest movie days of the year in the United States, it smashed competitors like the latest Disney Indiana Jones movie and was #1 on the charts. In Canada, the story is the same. It's selling out theaters, and theaters across the country have extended its run because of its success. So why is a movie about exposing child trafficking rings around the world and raising awareness about this scourge that is rarely talked about being trashed by almost every single legacy media outlet? And why does it appear as though legacy media journalists are desperately trying to stop you from seeing this film? You might have seen what the Washington Post and Rolling Stone have said about Sound of Freedom, but quite honestly, you have to hear what the CBC is telling Canadians about this film. Despite their outrageous takes, it appears as though these state-funded film critics have lost perspective on their jobs. Instead of telling us about how the film threads a narrative for 2.5 hours and how it captivates the audience, the film critics attack the audience and promoters of the film, not the film itself. Maybe that's because there's not much to criticize about it. But let's be honest, if there was ever a sign of approval for you to go see a film, it's when the CBC tells you to not go and see it. Drop a like in the video, help us out by subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, stick around for the Ratio of the Week prize, and the common question for the episode is this. It's a simple one. Have you seen Sound of Freedom? And if not, what are you doing? Go check it out right away. All right, let's get into it. Last night, I went to the movie theater to watch Sound of Freedom, something I would usually never do because, frankly, every single new movie these days seems to be some remake of a 1980s hit movie, but the lead characters are replaced with diversity hires, and the story always happens to be some far-left progressive narrative. But this, I can guarantee you, is a spectacular film. Not only is the story extremely important, not only is the message a critical one, the film itself is a really well-made movie. That's why the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 100%. And also, that is why every single piece of criticism of this movie isn't about the movie itself, it's about the storyline, and it's about who is promoting the movie. For the past 2 weeks, as Sound of Freedom has been smashing the box office in the United States and in Canada, legacy media outlets like Rolling Stone, Washington Post, CNN, mostly in the United States, have been trashing this film. Left, right, and center, they have been trying to discourage anyone from seeing it. The main line of attack is that this movie is a QAnon-adjacent film. But as always, the CBC just had to outdo every other legacy media outlet across the Western world and provide their own analysis on this film and try to dissect why so many people want to see this over some Disney remake of Indiana Jones. Take a listen at what this CBC pop culture columnist has to say about Sound of Freedom and why it's so successful. I'm sure you just can't believe what they're going to tell you. Take a listen.
But this is the way it beat it. Like, this is where things get really, really wild. Because, like, as I said, none of us heard of this movie. And you would have only heard of this movie if you are a regular among church groups, or you regularly watch Fox News, or you follow right-wing personalities like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson and the like, or you are a QAnon conspiracy theorist, or part of the so-called freedom movements. But make no mistake, I think the movie's success has a lot to do with it being a dog whistle for xenophobic, pro-Trump, pro-life types. I guess we can't say that the movie itself is made by QAnon types. I mean, the filmmakers deny that entirely. But certainly, Operation Underground Railroads, their political goals make it something that QAnon conspiracy theorists would rally behind. Just like racists like to rally behind Trump without him having to say anything overtly racist, right? And again, it's not just QAnon types rallying behind this movie. I was at a packed screening last night in Toronto. The movie's been selling out every night here in Toronto, and it's now opening wide in many more theaters. And, you know, at the theater, I was polling the people in the theater about what brought them to this movie that most of us never heard of. And there was a group who said they were encouraged to see the movie on the recommendation of their American friends who heard about that through their church group. And then there were groups who attended because they heard about it on Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro's podcast or other types of right-wing influencers. And then there was people who attended it because they were encouraged to do so by their online freedom rally groups. You know which ones I'm talking about, right? Like the Freedom Convoy type of people, right?
Unbelievable. So this pop culture critic from the CBC can't wrap his head around why Sound of Freedom is selling out in theaters across Toronto. He can't understand that a movie he has never heard about is smashing every other movie in the theaters. Oh, and because of that, it must be a dog whistle for xenophobic, pro-Trump, pro-life types. A movie that exposes child trafficking rings around the world. You know, it can't possibly be because actually, audience members are begging for some genuine storytelling. They're begging for a movie that actually appeals to them. That's not some woke remake of an already twice recycled film from their childhood. Yesterday, I clipped those comments from this CBC pop culture critic and put them up on Twitter. Canadians weren't surprised. Because don't forget, the CBC is the exact same organization that routinely defends drag shows for kids, that even has gone so far as to attack True North for exposing drag shows for kids on publicly funded libraries. They also have no problem attacking parents who take issue with gender ideology being forced onto children in grades as young as 4. So is it that surprising that this is the same company now attacking a movie like Sound of Freedom? That pop culture critic found my tweet and proudly said that yes, he did say these comments. He was proud about saying this film is a dog whistle for xenophobic, pro-Trump, pro-life types. That the only people who would have known about this film are churchgoers, are Ben Shapiro listeners, and those evil, nasty Freedom Convoy types. That would be you and me. Well, he was so proud to defend his comments, except for the fact that, like anyone who's very proud of their comments, he turned off replies. He didn't want people to actually criticize his comments on Twitter. He just wanted to say that, yes, he is behind these comments. Well, sure enough, I responded back to Mr. Radhayan Simon Pillay, and I wrote this. Why are your replies turned off if you're so proud of your statements? Do you really think that the success of Sound of Freedom is because it's a dog whistle for xenophobic, pro-Trump, pro-life types? Or were you just repeating what the CBC told you to say? Well, sure enough, Mr. Radhayan Simon Pillay got ratioed for this absurd take. Quite right as well. The reason I bring up the question as to whether or not he was repeating what the CBC told him to say is because this is exactly what the legacy media have been doing about this film. Just take a listen at what this QAnon CNN expert had to say about the film a few days ago.
In terms of child trafficking, we know trafficking is real. We know it has real victims. No one is denying that. But these films are created out of moral panics. They're created out of bogus statistics. They're created out of fear. And with something like Sound of Freedom, it specifically is looking at QAnon concepts of these child trafficking rings that are run by the high-level elites, and only people like Tim Ballard and only people like Jim Caviezel, and by extension, only people like the ticket buyer can help bring these trafficking rings down. So there's a very participatory element. You're not just going to see a movie, you're just killing 2 hours on a hot day. You are helping bring down these pedophile rings and save children. Now, it's not true, but it's a very comforting and it's a very warm feeling to have.
Now, this is what that bastion of journalistic integrity, The Guardian, had to say about Sound of Freedom as well. Take a look at this headline. Sound of Freedom, the QAnon-adjacent thriller seducing America. Jim Caviezel stars as a hero trying to stop child traffickers in a paranoid new movie, turning into a surprise box office hit. Yes, it has to be described as a paranoid new movie because, of course, that couldn't possibly be happening. It must be those paranoid QAnon people that are just too concerned about a non-issue. The worst headline of all happens to be from the Rolling Stone. Go figure. Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brain worms. The QAnon-tinged thriller about child trafficking is designed to appeal to the conscience of a conspiracy-addled boomer. Despite Rolling Stone getting absolutely destroyed for that absurd take, again, not criticizing the film, but criticizing the attendees, and criticizing the lead actor. Rolling Stone just couldn't help themselves. They followed up with an article yesterday saying this. Why anti-trafficking experts are torching Sound of Freedom. The new movie offers a false perception of child trafficking that experts worry could further harm the real victims. Oh, that's right. A movie that exposes child trafficking could potentially harm actual victims, experts say. Not like, of course, Torching, the only film that exposes child trafficking. That, of course, wouldn't harm the real victims. I'm sure that if Rolling Stone and their experts had their way, this movie would just not be made. I'm sure that would do much less harm to the real victims than making this movie that is actually a box office success. The Washington Post were one of the first to get on the bandwagon of trashing Sound of Freedom to try and stop you from seeing this film. We all know none of it's working, but take a look at what they wrote right after this film was smashing box office numbers. Take a look at this. Sound of Freedom, the low-budget film about child sex trafficking, almost topped the box office on July 4th. But its star, Jim Caviezel, has linked it to the QAnon movement. Oh, the dangerous QAnon movement. This is the way legacy media journalists work. None of them are original. Frankly, none of them are that smart. That's why they basically rewrite the same article and publish it under a different byline every single time. What they're trying to do is tell you that this movie is a QAnon-themed movie pushed by QAnon types. They're also trying to tell you that this movie falsely portrays the reality of child trafficking. That in fact, child trafficking is not as big of a deal as it is, and people aren't behind this effort. As though we're all stupid and aren't aware of, for example, the Jeffrey Epstein Island. Oh, was that fiction, Rolling Stone? Was that fiction or QAnon? CBC? Let me know. Because quite frankly, it appears as though, despite you guys not talking about it, everybody else seems to be well aware of this issue. This is how it works. If a film happens to have broad success and broad appeal to a majority of Americans and Canadians, and if the film is beating out Disney successes like Indiana Jones, and also Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson happen to support it, well, the film must be bad. It doesn't matter what the film is about. It doesn't matter how just the cause of the film is. If a new film is about how great multiculturalism is and how great mass immigration is, and it happens to be supported by Jordan Peterson, I guarantee you that the CBC would find a way to criticize it. They would tell you that, oh, it's actually one of those evil, nasty, far-right movies. That's how these people work. It doesn't matter what the film is. They're willing to trash their own reputations just to try and trash a very strong, very positive film about a real serious problem. And make no mistake about it, this is a real problem. Child trafficking, despite none of these outlets actually talking about it, is a significant problem. Maybe that's why they're also trying not to watch the movie, because it exposes their failure to tell a real story. Human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. Take that in, $150 billion a year for human trafficking. The United States is also one of the top destinations in the world for human trafficking and for child trafficking. And there are more humans in slavery today than at any time in human history, including at the peak of the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of these slaves are children. The same people that try to trash Sound of Freedom to try and stop you from watching this film are not only the same people that have neglected to tell the story of child trafficking, but are also the same people that have normalized films like Cuties from Netflix. Take a look at this CBC article trying to make excuses for why a film like Cuties should be on the air. Despite this French Netflix film showing preteen girls dressed provocatively twerking, the CBC interviewed the director and encouraged audience members to watch the film without judging it. Like I said before, there couldn't be a better sign of approval for you to go see this film than the CBC telling you not to go see it. I couldn't recommend this film enough. And at the heart of it, the message of the film is simple. It's one that we should all be able to rally behind. That God's children are not for sale. All right, ratio of the week time. The winner this week is global national news. You have to check out this ratio. The size of it is truly special. Take a look at this. 3,160 replies to only 518 likes at the time of this recording. Well, take a look at what the tweet is about. What message does Danielle Smith's straight pride photo send to Albertans? As if anyone actually cares about a man who's almost certainly an opposition plant wearing a green straight pride shirt taking a photo with Danielle Smith. Brian Garrettson writes this: none. You are telling people how they should be feeling. The media is sending the message. Harmon writes this: it's fine to be straight. Just like last month, people celebrated pride. Why can't anyone celebrate being straight? Oh yeah, and as Kat right here points out as well, Remember when Trudeau signed this flag and nobody talked about it? Why didn't Global News write an article about what kind of message Trudeau signing this flag sends to Canadians? It seems as though it's just another opportunity for them to attack Danielle Smith. And despite the legacy media not trying to find out who the person wearing the shirt was, Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre, and like every other mainstream conservative, capitulated and apologized so that they stand up for the 2S LGBT community. Here's a tip, guys. They're never going to stop trying to attack you for this, so stop trying to appease them. Stand up and just refuse to answer their ridiculous questions. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us this week on the show. Reminder to let me know in the comments your answer to the comment question. Have you seen Sound of Freedom? My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratio.